Hi, it's Josh, once again sitting on a floor and going through an unhaul video. The last unhaul video I made was regarding my board games, where I was trying to offload some board games to raise money to buy myself a 50th birthday gift. This time around I am unhauling books, and one reason that I am doing this particular unhaul, in addition to really kind of offloading stuff in general, is because I've had a kind of gradual shift over the years with regards to my view of things, of possessions. And there are three sort of main reasons for this. One has been the financial limitations, the fact that the cost of life in general has outgrown my income to a certain extent. With my little disability income not having kept up with everything, there has been a very much forced situation where I've had to live very simply. I haven't had any extra income to do anything with other than what my generous Patreon supporters give me every month, which does allow me to buy some games and books here and there, so that's pretty awesome. But other than that, I'm stretched pretty thin every month, and so I have not really been able to buy myself stuff in general other than the bare necessities. The other thing is kind of related to this house as well. Eventually I am going to have to move out of this house and downsize. My current mortgage has to be renewed in about 4 years, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to afford to keep living in this house in 4 years' time. I'd really love to, once I move out of this house, to really significantly downsize into something very small and something much more affordable that will really free up a lot of the financial stress and give me a much better cushion to live with day to day. But anyone who has ever moved or lives in a house knows that we have a tendency to grow to the size of the space around us and just accumulate things and fill up our spaces. And then when it comes time to pick up everything, pack it in boxes, and move it somewhere, then we really realize how much junk we have and have a lot of regrets at that point. So I don't want to have regrets when I move, especially if you've ever helped people move. You know that the worst thing in the world to try to move is book collections. It's like moving boxes of bricks. And so this is also one motivation, that eventually I'd really like to downsize, simplify, and just live a much more compact life. And so when that time comes, I would love to not have to worry about what all I'm going to do with all this junk I have. And then the third and final thing is just my aging, the fact that I'm about to turn 50 in a few months, and I'm dealing with kind of more serious health issues here and there, with a little bit of cancer issues on the face there last year, and some cardiovascular stuff that is a bit questionable. I have always assumed that I was never going to live to be old because of my chronic illnesses, because of the fact that the first time I almost died, I was only 23 years old, thanks to my Crohn's disease, and I just assumed I would never live to be old in general. And so I'm realizing that when the time comes that I die, whether it's next year or in 50 years from now, I don't want my children and my loved ones to be burdened with having to figure out what to do with all our junk. And I think one thing we get trapped into a little bit is this idea that, well, all these things are so precious to me. What a great gift I can give to my kids by passing all this stuff along to them. All these wonderful books, all these wonderful games, and all that stuff. When the truth is, our kids aren't going to be interested in exactly the same things as we are. There might be some overlap of interests, of course, but they're not going to want to be saddled with all my junk. And they're not going to want to have to figure out how to deal with it, in addition to grieving my death and everything else that goes along with losing a loved one. So the less stuff that I can leave behind to my kids and my loved ones when the time eventually comes, whenever that may be, then the better, I think. So all that combined, it leads me to more of an idea of simplification. And in general, I just am more and more liking the idea of living simply, living with few possessions, having a handful of books, a handful of games, and just, why do I need anything else? I really don't. And so I'm trying to just slowly get rid of stuff. And this book offload is part of that process. Part of that whole thought process, too, is the fact that I've really come to the conclusion that I really strongly dislike the idea of collecting. That the whole purpose of collecting whatever it is just obtaining stuff just to have it, to display it, to be able to look at it and feel a certain sense of happiness when you look at it on your shelf or whatever. And it really feeds into this whole consumerist, capitalist mentality that I'm really uncomfortable with. As I thought this through, I sat down and was thinking about, well, if I had unlimited financial resources, what would I want to collect myself? And the first thing that popped into my head there was really old stuff, like historical things, ancient Roman coins, or prehistoric arrowheads and pottery shards and dinosaur bones and all this fun stuff from ancient history. It'd be super fun to have a collection of that. But even with that, I was like, well, first of all, that stuff is really best in a museum so that it can be enjoyed by lots and lots of people. I really, really don't like the idea that rich people are hoarding these things in their own private collection, often illegally acquiring them so that they can just have them for themselves and they're not being enjoyed by society at large. So that's one thing. Another thing is just the fact that I would be putting so much money into just having stuff instead of putting it towards good use or even more useful use for people who are in need and that sort of thing. So even the things that I would most want to collect, if I had the money, I think it would be an actually bad thing to do so. So I've really gone off this whole concept of collecting, and the very last holdout in terms of the things that I've prized and tried to collect for myself is my book collection. I've always been a very avid reader. I've always loved the idea of having a big library of lots of amazing books that I could look at and enjoy, and that I would have access to any of these wonderful books to read at any time I wanted to. But again, as I've come around to this way of simplification and living simply, I've realized that I need to let go of even my books for all the reasons previously stated. And so I've made an attempt here to downsize considerably. The first time I had to do this actually was when my wife left me and I was essentially moved into a very small space. I had to get rid of a lot of stuff initially before I could have access to this house again. So that's the first time I really downsized my book collection. And then this is going to be my second big book unhaul. This time I thought I would make a video about it to show you which books I'm getting rid of. Now, in terms of the ones I've decided to keep, again, I wanted to keep as few books as possible. So in terms of books that I have previously read already, I only wanted to keep my top favorites, the ones that on GoodReads are 5 stars out of 5, because there might be a chance that I would come back and reread those books at some point, or maybe I'd want to share those books with somebody. I almost never reread books, but every so often I do. So I wanted to keep my very favorite books on hand, the ones that in terms of my rating would be like 9.5 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 books. And literally everything else I would just get rid of, even if there were 8.5 out of 10, 9 out of 10 books, really books that I enjoyed a lot. Realistically, it's almost certainty that I would never get back and reread them again. And then the second category of books obviously are the unread books, and all the books on my bookshelves are books that I have acquired with the assumption that if I were to read them, I would probably enjoy them, and that's probably true. But with the amount of unread books I have, I had to say to myself realistically, there's almost no chance that I'm going to get to all of these books in addition to whatever new books I continue to acquire as time goes by. So I had to look at each one carefully and go, realistically, I know I would probably enjoy this book if I read it, but realistically, am I actually going to get to this at some point? Or is this so far down the to be read pile that it is probably never going to get that enjoyment out of me and I should pass it along to somebody else? So again, I've had to be fairly strict with myself in terms of the unread books that I've kept and go, okay, I might get to this at some point, and if that's not the case, it has to go out. I guess there is a third category of books here, which are my sort of history books that I've leafed through a little bit here and there over the years. Some of these have been on the shelf for a long time, but don't really have much purpose to keep them, and they're going to be on the way out as well. So all that being said, I do have about 75 book titles to mention here, so let's get right to it and go through these as fast as possible so that this video isn't super long. And let's start with the smallest pile of books here, which is the unread books that I will probably realistically never read, and we'll just blast through those real quick. We have The Aeneid by Virgil. We have Life on the Mississippi by Mark Twain. I do have a couple of Mark Twain books on the shelf still. Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Got a couple of Sir Walter Scott books. I have Red Gauntlet, and I have The Bride of Lammermoor. I have really enjoyed a couple of Sir Walter Scott's books in the past, and I probably enjoy these, but unlikely to get to them. I have this old version of Robin Hood, The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, written and illustrated by Howard Pyle, which I might hang on to if it wasn't in kind of pretty rough condition. Looking at it again, I don't know if I might end up putting it back on my shelf or offload it, but anyways, carrying on, we have Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco. I read The Name of the Rose, I think was by Umberto Eco, and didn't love that book, so this one is going. We have a sci-fi book, Neuromancer by William Gibson. We have a book called Directive 51 by John Barnes, which I think is maybe a sci-fi thriller. I'm not exactly sure. A few of these books I got for free from various places and just never got around to reading them. This is Open City by Teju Cole. And then finally in this pile we have a book called Juliet Naked by Nick Hornby. So those are the unread books that I'm looking to offload. The next pile here are those history books that I mentioned that I've leafed through and enjoyed, but again, don't really have use for them. I've got a huge stack of these Osprey books. We have The Wars of the Barbary Pirates that I actually purchased for a board game review I did a while back called, I think, The Shores of Tripoli or something like that. I have The Wars of the Roses, Armies of Medieval Burgundy, German medieval armies, the Scottish and Welsh wars, French medieval armies, medieval European armies, English longbowmen, Henry V and the conquest of France, Agincourt 1415, the armies of Agincourt, the armies of Crécy and Poitiers. A lot of these books actually were my dad's, going back probably more than 50 years ago, and this book in particular got me interested in the 100 Years' War, medieval history, and a lot of these books I have kept because at one point I wanted to design a board game based on the 100 Years' War, but eventually kind of lost interest in that. But I always, this brings back childhood memories of looking at these knights and wanting to learn more about them and their history. Carrying on, speaking of the 100 Years' War and Crécy 1346, that's all my medieval stuff. And then some more modern, we have Eyewitness Vietnam, which comes with a DVD in it. And we have World War II, The People's Story, exactly the type of book you would expect to see on a 50-year-old man's shelf, of course. So those are all my history books. Now getting to the books that I have read and am unlikely to read again. We'll begin with this little illustrated comic style, graphic novel style book that somebody had given to me at some point. I don't really remember where that ultimately came from, unfortunately. But let's get into our literary fiction here. We have A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, as well as Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Both of these are amazing books, really, really good. But if I wanted to read more Dickens, I would want to pick up books of his that I haven't read yet and carry on with some of his other stuff, so that's why those are going. We have Ernest Hemingway, A Farewell to Arms. We have To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, obviously a really cool book. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. We have one that I recently did a review on, Leonard and Hungry Paul by Ronan Hessian. We have All My Puny Sorrows by Marion Taves. I read this years and years ago, don't really remember much about it. another one I read a long time ago, Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides, and I remember this being a really, really neat book about a transgender person, and that's all I really remember about it at this point. This book, called Estoril by Dejan Tiago Stankovic, was given to me by one of my Patreon supporters, and it's a historical fiction work that I really enjoyed, but again, the chances of rereading are almost nil. And then we have the Regeneration trilogy, more historical fiction by Pat Barker, another more recent of my video reviews here. This is a whole trilogy of books, obviously, and it is one that I thought was pretty well done, as I said in my review. Moving on, I guess there's only one book in the horror category, one of the only horror novels I've ever read, The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. Made a video about it. I thought that was a really well-written book. We have some post-apocalyptic fiction, Margaret Atwood with The Handmaid's Tale, and in my opinion, the even better written sequel, The Testaments. Both obviously excellent books. I've got some steampunk books. I guess all the rest of these are going to fall within the speculative fiction category in terms of being sci-fi and fantasy. We have The Aeronaut's Windlass by Jim Butcher, the only Jim Butcher book I've ever read, first book of his steampunk series, and I thought it was good, but not interesting enough to continue with the series. Adrian Tchaikovsky's Guns of the Dawn, a book that has a really cool story, but I didn't think was well written, unfortunately. Again, a lot of this stuff that I'm mentioning, I have reviews on my channel if you look them up and want to know more about what I think about them. For example, these two, again, are more recent reviews. But these are books by Jonathan L. Howard, Johannes Cabal the Necromancer, and Johannes Cabal the Detective. Books that I really did not enjoy. A couple more science fiction books. We have Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. As I record this now, I am halfway through editing this video, so you will have seen this review before this unhaul video, and you'll see what I thought about Flowers for Algernon. Then we have the first 3 books of the Dune series. One of my brothers is currently borrowing one of them, and I asked him if he wanted the other 2, and he said yes, so I'm going to pass along this little box set to him. Getting into the straight-up fantasy novels, there are some that I have given away to another friend. There is the Licanius trilogy by James Islington, and then there's the 4-part The Faithful and the Fallen quartet by John Gwynne. Both series that I thought were okay, but didn't love, and so I passed those along to somebody who will probably enjoy them more than I did. As for the rest of my fantasy books, we have a couple of cozy fantasy books with Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry and Bookshops and Bone Dust by the same author. This book was good. This one wasn't particularly good. Again, I've got reviews. I have the 6 books of the Seven Watchers trilogy by Juliette Marillier, Daughter of the Forest, Child of the Prophecy, Son of the Shadows, Heir to Seven Waters, Seer of Seven Waters, and Flame of Seven Waters. A little bit of a mixed bag overall. I did enjoy the series a fair bit for the most part. Some of the books were better than others, certainly. But we went on to an author who has the most kind of up and down in terms of my opinions of his books. He has some of my very, very favorite books of all time and some really not good books at all. This one falls right in the middle. This is Tigana by Guy Gabriel Kay. Quite a chonker of a fantasy novel that, again, I thought was good, but not one of his great ones. So it's on the way out. I have Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Interesting book for sure. The Starless Sea by Aaron Morgenstern. Another interesting book, but didn't really hit with me particularly hard. This brick of a book called Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clark, a book that was very well written, but the story just bored me to death. We have the first 3 books, I think, of the Belgariad series by David Eddings. I read the first book and didn't enjoy it at all. This was a gift from one of my viewers here on YouTube that I really appreciated the gift, and I was really happy I got a chance to try it out, but it just didn't work for me, unfortunately. And then we have The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, really nice illustrated edition that I didn't really particularly like the story, and I definitely do not like this author after everything we've learned about Neil Gaiman, so I definitely do not want this on my shelf still. Next up, we'll look at my non-fiction books. We have a book called No FX, The Hepatitis Bathtub and Other Stories by Jeff Aluli, who interviewed the members of the band NoFX to get their story, all the really disgusting and horrible stories that those band members have to tell. We have a wonderful science book called A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson. A lot of great, interesting stuff in that book. Another really fun book, John Krakauer. Well, fun is a terrible word to describe Into Thin Air, considering it's about one of the greatest tragedies that happened on Mount Everest. But definitely a nail-biting story. Quite a wild ride with that one. The Last Full Measure, How Soldiers Die in Battle by Michael Stevenson was an interesting read. Waterloo Voices 1815 by Martin Beardsley. Loved hearing the first-hand accounts from the soldiers who survived the Battle of Waterloo. Obviously, they're not from the soldiers who died during the Battle of Waterloo. But the last one here is 102 Minutes, The Untold Story of the Fight to Survive Inside the Twin Towers by Jim Dwyer and Kevin Flynn. Another interesting story of human survival that was pretty riveting. So that is, counting the individual books of the trilogies and whatnot, more than 75 books that I am hoping to get to a used bookstore tomorrow in the local area that I heard is decent about giving a bit of money for books that are in fairly decent condition. A number of these are purchased new, read just one time, so hopefully I'll be able to get a bit of cash back and free up some room on my shelves and continue the process of simplifying my life. Time out. I'm going to jump in here roughly a month after recording this video to give you a little update. So I did take these roughly 75 books. I grabbed 2 very large cardboard boxes and dumped all the books into the cardboard boxes, and then drove to a bookstore in downtown Kitchener that was recommended to me, the one that I just mentioned, I believe. And this is a bookstore called A Second Look Books and More, and it turns out this is just an unusually large, spacious, well-organized, really great independent used bookstore with a very knowledgeable owner. And so the problem was, though, when I got downtown Kitchener, it turns out they had closed the main street, King Street, there for Christmas festivities, and I had to park 2 blocks away. And then I was left with the decision with my 2 boxes of books, and of course I thought, well, I'm not going to make 2 trips when I'm 2 blocks away. So I took these 75 books that, I kid you not, must have weighed pretty damn close to 150 pounds. It took all of my strength just to hold them, and I started waddling down the street towards this bookstore. I had to stop every half block or so to rest them on a bench and catch my breath for a couple of minutes, and then pick them up and take this load of books to the bookstore. Oh my goodness, it took every ounce of strength I had just to carry all these books. And you know you're looking bad when even the homeless folks are feeling bad for you, because I was just about at the bookstore and this really nice, very kind homeless fellow stopped and was like, "Do you have to go much farther with those?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "Well, do you need me to hold a door or anything for you?" And by that point, my arms were giving out, so I just kind of dumped the boxes on the sidewalk in front of the bookstore. I was like, "No, thanks, I'm here now." But yeah, that was rough. It was literally the hardest I've ever worked at being lazy. But anyways, I brought the books in, and it turns out that, I mean, the bookstore owner, like I said, super knowledgeable guy. He took at least a good half an hour, 45 minutes to look through all the books and decide which ones he wanted to take. So, of course, I could have just taken him half the books, had him start looking through them, gone back and got the other half. But anyways, at the end of it, he basically wanted to take roughly half the books, probably about 30 or 40 of the books, and he offered me either $250 store credit or $150 cash, and what I ended up taking was 4 of his books plus $105 cash, and then I lugged the other 30 or 40 books back home again, which was significantly easier than when I had arrived. But in case you're curious about the 4 books that I took from his store, I have 1 fiction book and 3 nonfiction. The fiction is a fantasy book called Of Blood and Fire by Ryan Cahill. The 3 nonfiction, our first one is by by Ernest Hemingway called A Movable Feast, Sketches of the Author's Life in Paris in the 20s. So it was on my list of books to check out, and the bookstore owner said it was a good book. He recommended it too. And then these other two are both from Margaret Atwood. I'm always interested in learning how to write better, even though I haven't really gotten super serious with any writing at this point in my life, but it's something I would like to do eventually. And I've heard repeatedly that Margaret Atwood is a good author to turn to for writing advice. So I got this book from her called Moving Targets, Writing with Intent, 1982 to 2004, which contains a whole bunch of her essays. And then a shorter book from Margaret Atwood called Negotiating with the Dead, A Writer on Writing. And so that's what ended up with all these books. I still, like I said, have a bunch of books that I need to find another way to offload. Some of them I will probably try to sell maybe just through Facebook Marketplace, and the rest might just get donated to the local thrift shop. I did end up keeping that Robin Hood book because its condition wasn't good enough for the bookstore owner to purchase, so I ended up taking that one home and putting that Howard Pyle book back on my shelf. But that's the update. That's where I ended up with all that. Let's just wrap this up now. What do you think about the maybe slightly controversial things I had to say about collecting things, about the idea of living simply and all that stuff? I'd really love to hear what you think about it. And as always, I'm really interested in hearing what you're reading and any books you particularly enjoyed lately. And I just really appreciate you watching. Cheers. Oh wait, all the rest of